everyone, so welcome back. In our previous video, if you remember, we have talked about Auger electron process, right? I will put the link here if you have not watched the Auger electron process, or if you don't have any idea about the process. Basically, for some certain of level, it's better to have some kind of knowledge about the Auger process when it comes to depth profiling, right? I will try my best to explain to you everything, but if it's better to have the in-depth concept and in-depth knowledge about the Auger process. Now, depth profiling, what we are trying to do is, let's say we have a sample, right? Here we have a sample. So this sample is a material, right? So what we want to do is we need to analyze in depth composition, right? What sort of materials are on the surface, and then after a few angstroms, like 40 angstrom in depth of the material, right? What is the composition, and again in 100 angstrom depth, what's the composition? 200 angstrom depth, what's the composition? Likewise, we are going to see what are the elemental composition inside our sample. Up to now, for both for few videos which we have discussed before, like XPS, AES, we all focused on the surface, but in this case we are focusing more on the inside of our material. So principle is basically, what we are trying to do is we are going to do the same AES process. We are going to send some high energetic electrons, remove some electron, bring some upper level electron to a vacancy, and then transfer an Auger electron process. Transfer an Auger electron, we calculate the Auger electron. So I will not go through the detailed process of the Auger process. That's why I have put the link here, so you can watch the detailed process. And after we have done those Auger analysis, right, we get some sort of idea about the surface of our material. And now, after the surface analysis, we need to go into the depth of our material. What we are going to do is we are going to introduce some high energetic ions like argon plus. We are going to bombard these argon plus ions to our surface. What these atoms will do is it will transfer its kinetic energy to the atoms on the surface, and our surface will be peeled off. Now in our new sample, right, the surface layer is being peeled off by these ions. So we stop the bombardment, and now we do the AES process again. We do the Auger process again. We use some high energetic electrons, send them in. The electrons in the Auger process will kick out some electrons on the lower levels, and higher level electrons will come down to fill those vacancies, and an Auger electron will be released, right? So now this process, right, this Auger process happens in the this layer. It's not the surface, it's in the depth. We have peeled off the surface. So now in this process we can have the data about 40 angstrom in depth compositions, and after the analysis we stop the electron bombardment. Now again what we do is we are going to introduce the argon plus, or otherwise our ions, again to the surface of our material. So the bombardment of these argons will peel off this surface also. Now we don't have that surface in our sample because we have peeled it off. Now there's a new surface. We are going to stop the bombardment and again send the electrons to remove the Auger electron. Okay, so this is the concept of depth profiling. But what's more interesting is analyzing the data, right? So we will do some examples and see how we can do this depth profiling, how we can get details about the depth profile. Okay, let's have an example, right? So here I have shown you a spectrum based on the depth profile. Okay, now what we have done is here, let me tell you the explication here. So here we have nickel, okay, some sort of thing. Okay, very sorry about it. So here we have a nickel, chromium alloy. We have a nickel chromium alloy, and what we have done is we have exposed this alloy to the oxygen at higher temperature, let's say 500 Celsius. So our intention is insert the oxygen into our alloy, right? So what we need is we need this alloy to be inserted with the oxygen. And after this exposure to the oxygen, we have taken this material and we have done this particular depth profiling analysis. So we have used electron bombardment and we stop it, and we use argon plus to remove first layer, and then we again analysis. Again we peel off one other layer. Likewise we do the profiling. So this is the data which we have. So I want you to have some amount of watch this data, watch this graph very carefully, and come to some sort of conclusion. What conclusions, what data can you see based on this spectrum? So here in our depth profiling, our x-axis represented by the depth. This is the angstrom in angstrom, and our y-axis is driven by peak to peak Auger signals in arbitrary units. So you don't need to worry about too much about it. This is basically what the instrument gives us. And now let's try to analyze our profile. So here this is the depth, right? This is the depth. As you can see, when we go, this is the zero depth. So this is basically the surface. So when we go deep into a surface, you will see the first peak we have is oxygen. So our oxygen is there from like 40 angstrom to 100 angstrom, right? After the 100 angstrom, right, the oxygen is no more because the oxygen peak is diminished. So first conclusion what we can say is, after this particular process of oxygen embedding the alloy, right, after reacting with oxygen has embedded our material up to 40 to 100 in depth, right? So inside this depth 40 angstrom to 100 angstrom, the oxygen is there. But after the 100 angstrom in depth of our material, oxygen is no more. And also look at the chromium here, the blue color line, it's basically the chromium. The chromium is there from 40 angstrom to like 160. Yeah, 160. It's around 160. Okay, so this is basically the range of the chromium. So you can see chromium peak is there from 40 angstrom to 160 angstrom. When you look at the nickel, there's a small nickel peak here, right? Because at first in few layers here 0 to 100 there is no nickel. The nickel concentration is very low. But after the 100 to like let's say 150, there's a nickel. There's a high concentration of nickel. That's why there's a nickel peak here. And then when it comes to silicon, right? When it comes to silicon, this is silicon. Silicon is there after 160 to like we don't have exact value for which place where the silicon is in. Possibly when you see this kind of peak, possibly our whole material is consists with silicon. Like our materials, most of the concentration of the material is consists with silicon. So that's why the silicon is, right? That's why silicon peak is very high and it continues to the infinite, like it's continued for the whatever amount we have. So this is the data which we can say from a depth profile, right? So what you have to do is you need to see the peaks, you need to see what sort of materials we have, and we can see in what depth these peaks are given to us, and then we can come to the conclusion. In these depths we have this particular element, like as an example we can say in which depth nickel is there and in which depth the silicon comes to appear, right? So these are the things which we can say about a particular element, right? Overall we can say this nickel and chromium alloy, this alloy is on a silicon substrate, right? Because silicon is the base here, right? You can see here silicon is the base. Silicon has the highest peak and silicon has the most of the area around our profile. So silicon is the base and all the other compounds, here look at this, all the other compounds are coming before the silicon. So all oxygen, nickel, chromium, everything is top of the silicon. So this is the depth basically, right? So here look at this, when we are peeling off surface layer by layer, at first you will find oxygen and then chromium and then nickel. Finally in the depth, very depth, you will find the silicon. So silicon is in the depth, and then you have nickel, and then you have both oxygen and chromium. Likewise, this is the depth profile. This is how we build up our material. So I hope you get the idea. If you have any sort of questions, please feel free to answer. Feel free to ask me. I will try my best to answer those questions. In our next video, we will talk about another amazing concept, which is ion scattering spectroscopy. Okay. So we will meet up in our next video.